As we come into focus, Warlords. I did that on purpose, I must admit. So, first off the bat, I like this game a whole hell of a lot more than I should. And because of that, I guess I'll focus on the flaws. But I do want to bring out right away, I really enjoy this one. Alright, let's tell you why I enjoy it. It's a really simple, yet still allows for some variance and some randomness framework for diplomacy. And you could say, well, there are a lot of games kind of like that. Yeah, but this one kind of, I don't know. It's hard for me to actually point to why this one hits the road on all wheels or something like that. And a lot of, say, fantasy games fail a little bit more. Saw a post recently on City-States of Arc-Lyral, and that's got about as much flavor as this, but because it uses hex movement and stuff like that, it just doesn't feel quite as diplomacy based. It feels like you're trying to do little geometric stuff with your armies and stuff. And same thing with like Divine Right. That just never caught me the same way. Barbarian Kings I like, but it's a little richer in terms of what it provides you. And it ends up being kind of this guesswork game. Now this game has some guessing in it, in the sense that you've got all the army strengths are essentially hidden on your little record sheet. Now playing this solo is really a pain in the ass because I got to keep track of, everybody's strength points. But playing it opposed isn't so bad for that. The only kind of complex thing is dealing with the minors, because one person has to kind of take over keeping track of them. Everybody can see the information. Okay, so what's wrong with it? Well, to begin with, it's not, I don't think, terribly historically accurate. For one thing, there were not these major warlord factions that covered most of China. The Manchurians had a faction during the KMT period that was fairly potent. But for the most part, it was smaller warlord groups fighting, and the player alignments, each player is just too big a chunk. Although it captures some of the feel with the fluid diplomacy that's allowed in the game. One thing that I like about the game is that breaking an alliance isn't free. Like in diplomacy, if you want to break an alliance, hey, too bad, man, right? And you can do that here. But there is a formal alliance system. But on the other hand, it's not prohibitively expensive. It's this minor cost on the very empires in arms like political status chart. EU too. But the political status means so little in this game in terms of what you gain and lose for a diplomatic action or whatever. That essentially the alliance, breaking that doesn't do you a lot of harm. But the alliance does do you a nice little piece in terms of being able to share space with someone else. And in fact not being allowed to fight them, knowing you can traverse their territory if need be, etc. What else? The actual play of the game, you might think that it's going to suffer from sort of a balance of powers type situation, and the 16 to 26 scenario especially seems vulnerable to this, but there's a fixed end point to the game, and there is a fixed set of victory conditions. If you can get the ultimate victory of the 16 provinces or whatever, yeah, that's not going to happen in a balance of power situation, right? That's great and everything. Some people aren't going to like this. Some people do not like games where, oh look, I managed to get that little stab in at the end and get just a few more points than you. But I think it's one of the better solutions to the balance of power problem is to make sure that the game has some sort of end point that'll come. Here I Stand has one, but you never really reach it because it kind of accelerates beyond that. And it's good that you, in a sense, it's good that you never reach it, and here I stand, because it's such a long game if you could make it all the way through. But usually somebody makes it to a victory in there. This doesn't have any kind of gimmicky type situation in the way that the coin series does. It's not going to come down to a single die roll every game or a single card flip or whatever. It's going to come down to who makes the alliances, etc., and who kind of maneuvers themselves. It's kind of neat that the victory conditions are that tripartite situation. It doesn't. They usually work together for the most part, but it gives you a little bit of wiggle room where you could maybe just kind of optimize your opponents, or one opponent that you're most competing with, in order to squeak by with a victory when it doesn't look like you're the most powerful player, which I think is kind of cool. Components wise, the little counters, they're really pretty, but I mean, this is an old game. It's from I think 85, I don't know, but they are beginning to kind of fray a little bit. So they're not as sturdy a stock as, say, some of the SPI stuff that I have that's in good shape. The map is a computer-generated kind of hideousness. I don't even know if it's actually computer-generated, but it tries to look like a computer game of the era it comes from, which I find kind of amusing, but it's not terribly appealing to look at. Good card stock there, lots of reference cards, one for each player with a little map and all the charts that you need. Well, not one for each player. There are 4. Maybe 3. But they're sufficient to go around. The rule book, I probably complain about it more than I should, because I find things in it and I say, yeah, I'm playing it right, or, ooh, there we go. But there are some cases where it's a little ambiguous, and that's always problematic. And there are also, it's not terribly easy to find things. So, for example, the Soviet rules being in a different place from the Japanese, the communist Chinese being split up, the place that looks like it's most about them isn't what contains most of the rules about them. Most of the rules about them are in the guerrilla units, which only they have, but there are rules that aren't directly about the guerrillas that are in there. And some rules, you know, I remember reading and didn't really find. I like the luck balance in the game. You got this randomization of the famines. Those can be really, really important in terms of what's going on. And then you've got a fairly random combat result table. It's not, you know, strength matters, there's no question, but if you're close in strength, you can win a battle that maybe you shouldn't, or if you have the combat effectiveness bonus. I always forget to roll for the damn miners for their combat effectiveness rating. How important is that? You know, the only reason it's important is because all the minor values are available to everybody to look at. So you kind of can guarantee a victory, or at least give yourself a fairly good probability. And once you start having that kind of determinism creep in, it kind of takes something away from the game. But, you know, it's not that big a deal. Fighting the miners, I just end up, I don't think I rolled for them after the first couple turns, and I was sporadic on that. So anyway, I've always had a little bit of a decent amount of fun with this. It's kind of a comfort food game for me solo. The 4-player game may be a little flavorless. The 3-player game is very cool because, first of all, there are very few kind of historically based 3-player war game type things. This is, at best, barely a war game in terms of that. I mean, it just does not go after simulating the military side of things at all in any detail. So it very clearly fits into my Wimp Games category, but you know, it's historical and it does have some link to the reality. Even if I think that there are some significant historical flaws in it, especially if you play the campaign game. Like the transition to the KMT, which there's no rules for that. I made that shit up, so ignore that. But just a number of the factors in it. And another one is the communists have such a hard time getting started in the 26 to 36 scenario. I never seen them survive the transition from not existing to being a real player in the game. I've never seen that happen, which is why I like the 3-player game. I don't really like that 26 to 36 scenario. It's the most interesting piece to me in terms of the historical period and what might be happening and everything. But it's also the worst handled in the game, largely because the communists really don't quite work in it. They work fine in the 3-player scenario because they have some income, although they are a little weaker than they should be. I think every time I've played the 3-player scenario, the KMT's won. I could easily see the communists. I could easily see the communist KMT struggling too much, or in the campaign, I could see some of the factions interfighting too much, and the Japanese taking a victory, but I've never seen it happen because, well, I normally play the big campaign solo, and in the 3-player scenario, I haven't played it that many times, but the communists and the KMT kind of say, we have to work together, we will fall. And that's really the problem, is the Japanese are just so scary. So in the game that I was playing, there was quite an incentive for the Sun, for example, to kind of say, hey, Japan, we can kind of work together. And Japan would love that. But the Sun felt like they had a significant advantage working with the KMT to fight off the Japanese. They also really wanted to wipe out the communists, though. So it wasn't 100% aiming a collaboration against the Japanese. But the Japanese have a really tough time unless there's significant internal struggles. They came about as close as I've seen them come in game I played. Anyway, this one always really, really pleases me for some reason. It makes me happy to play. I don't think as a game that I can really recommend it all that strongly, because it does have those historical flaws. It does have the rules ambiguities where you really kind of have to house rule some stuff. And even in the gameplay of it, there's this having to write everything down, the points, the amount of luck in it and everything. I know a lot of people aren't going to like those little facets. They just don't faze me too much. Although it does, the pace of the game, where there's sort of an economic phase that takes up about half the time that you're spending playing the game, the economic phases take up. And that's kind of painful. But it does have sort of the flavor of the Empires in Arms in some ways. It has enough things that it obviously, it's so clear that these Australian guys who made this had played some EIA and said, wow, let's use some of those ideas and kind of try to work it in. They didn't develop it in as much detail as it could have been. I probably would like it more if they were. But as it stands, I think it's a horribly underrated game compared to the amount of fun that I have with it. If you put this up against something like Britannia or something, this just is so much more enjoyable for me. Britannia has this horrible headache of having to really know where your victory point spaces are and know where everyone else's are to be able to, make reasonable decisions even within the game. And but otherwise, this is kind of similar to it, except for the hidden strength points and the very light economic system to this is a little richer as well. But anyway, it definitely hits a sweet spot for me that it's hard to explain. But I look at the rating over on Board Game Geek, and I don't know what it's under a 6 or something, and I think, wow, this is such a cool game to be so poorly rated. I don't understand it. I mean, it's not like I gave it a huge rating, but I don't give bloated ratings, and a lot of games get the advantage of people who are like, I always want to play this. This is actually one I would like to play more than most games that I own. I would say it's maybe in the top 5 to 10% of the games that I own in terms of, yeah, that would be cool to play. You know, I mean, not sort of this would be something I'd like to show people, but this is one that I really get a kick out of playing because of that light diplomacy framework. But not so light, not like Dip itself is, where that's all there is to it. There's luck, there's die rolling, there's chances to be, really upset about a bad roll or happy about a good roll or whatever. That just adds a little bit of flavor to me in that sort of AT sort of way. Anyway, hopefully you saw enough of the game to be able to make your own decision, because I'm obviously unqualified to judge this one. I like it way more than anybody else seems to.